The journal prompt asks you to read through several excerpts, noting places where you see patterns in format and language that were distinctive enough to have caught your attention. In this tutorial, I will show you how to look for those patterns by working through 3 excerpts, all of which explore the topic of leadership, but each by a different author. This first example is from a famous work of political philosophy, Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince. Though it was written centuries ago, it is still used as a guide to gain and keep power, especially in government and business. While The Prince is not considered literature in the way that the works of poets and playwrights might be, something about how Machiavelli structures his arguments seems closer to literature than a how-to guide we might find today. Let's look at the first paragraph where Machiavelli presents one of those arguments. The first half of the first sentence expresses what he thinks his reader would expect, honesty. But the second half undercuts it with the opposite. Leaders who know how to manipulate the minds of men craftily win out over those who act honestly. The sentence structure is worth noting here because it disrupts the reader's expectations. I would mark this down in my journal. Machiavelli sustains this emphasis on opposites into the second paragraph by dividing his advice into, quote, 2 ways of fighting, one with laws and the other with force, or 2 sides of the same coin. He reinforces this duality in the symbol of Chiron, the centaur, a mythic creature thought to be half man and half beast. Thus, in my journal entry, I would describe this pattern of opposites and include examples that illustrate what I saw. This next example is from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It looks like a poem rather than one of the most enduring works of military strategy. It does not rhyme, but the text is broken into stanzas in the way that many poems are. I would note in my journal that the arrangement of these words reminds me of a poem and include some examples to explain why. Other features remind me of poetic or rhetorical devices. There is repetition in several of the lines: never move, never deploy, never fight, and the words must never are repeated twice after that. The use of such a strong word, never, suggests that there is no room for exception, yet the use of the word except gets repeated as well. The arrangement of other words gives them special emphasis: move, halt, anger, and spite. They stand alone even though they are part of a sentence. By arranging the words in this way, the speaker slows down the reading of these stanzas, a method for forcing the reader to pay greater attention to them. As I continue to look for patterns, I notice that many of the words that conclude this passage are adjectives, or words that modify nouns: enlightened, prudent, effective, cautious, intact, all words with a positive connotation, or the feeling that the words evoke in addition to their literal meaning. Thus the passage ends on an upbeat tone rather than a dark one. Yet this work was not designed to be read as a poem, so I don't know if this would be considered literature. It is advice to rulers and generals about their specific roles and behaviors during combat, but the speaker uses poetic devices, repetition, word choice, line breaks, to convey that advice rather than a list of rules in a handbook. This makes it seem literary to me. After I describe these word patterns in my journal, with examples to illustrate them, I might also record a few questions for further exploration, such as how this format or genre may be specific to the culture, ancient China, that produced it. The final example is clearly from a work of literature, William Shakespeare's play, Henry V. I'll begin by focusing on the person speaking, since in this excerpt there is only one, the king, Henry V. First, if you do some Googling about Henry V, you will learn that he was an actual king of England and that he did fight and win the Battle of Agincourt. Shakespeare is writing almost 200 years after that battle, so this is not a real-time battlefield report, but a revisiting of an historical event. To complicate things further, Henry V is often referred to as one of Shakespeare's history plays. Does this mean this is a work of history rather than literature? No, it is not a history, because Shakespeare is imagining what this real person might have said the night before the battle. No extant manuscript of what Henry V said is available. So Shakespeare created a character he feels would say these things he invented, and this is where the author's imagination steps in when a historian's would step out. What then does this passage reveal about Shakespeare's imagination? First, the speaker's lines depict Henry V as a true leader who can inspire those who follow him to demonstrate courage under fire. Second, many of these lines, especially the first one, speak about honor and remembrance, character traits the young king values and that exemplify his talent as a leader. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when the day is named. Those of you who have watched veterans at Veterans Day celebrations have probably witnessed behavior like that. As I work my way down the passage, I see that brotherhood is also mentioned, and in lines I find more familiar than any of the others. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. I know there was a television show that aired a few years ago called Band of Brothers, and that it was about a close group of soldiers in World War II. I see now that the title of that show is referencing this speech in order to transfer the meaning of it, honor, remembrance, and brotherhood, to its storyline and characters. In literature, we call this an allusion, or a reference to something outside of the text that amplifies something in it. But to get that meaning, I would have to know about this speech in Henry V first so that I could make the connection. In literary analysis, making connections like this to other texts and other cultures is important. Thus, in my journal entry, I would record those connections and examples that illustrate what I learned. To sum up, my journal entry would have notes about the sentence structure and use of symbolism in Machiavelli's The Prince, the form, word choice, and unique arrangement of words in Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and the use of cultural context and cultural connections in Shakespeare's play Henry V. All of these works contain literary elements, but if you walk into a Barnes & Noble, you may see the first two shelved in literature, but it's more likely you will find them shelved in philosophy, business, and military history sections. You will not, however, find Shakespeare's Henry V in any of those sections except those for literature. His work is an imaginative recreation of a historical event written in a genre easily recognized as literary, the stage play, and in language so memorable we are still quoting it more than 400 years after it was written.